Okay, before we even get into this today, I really need you to smash that like and subscribe button right now.
Yeah, seriously do it because what we are about to discuss is, well, it's definitely going to trigger the algorithm. We're walking right into the fire with this one.
Oh, for sure. We are unpacking an ebook today that frames itself less as a relationship guide and more as a weapon for survival.
It is definitely not your standard self-help read. I mean, we are doing a deep dive into Never Listen to a Nag, Do Not Encourage Her Emotional Terrorism, or Train Your Captor by Conrad Riker.
Right, and just by that title alone, this isn't going to be about learning active listening or, buying flowers to smooth things over.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And we should clarify right up front, our goal here is to impartially report on the content provided in this text.
Yeah.
We're not taking sides or endorsing these viewpoints, but we're simply trying to convey the ideas contained in the original source material.
Exactly. We're breaking down his arguments so you can understand the mechanics of what he's saying. Riker's premise is ultra incisive, and he argues that modern marriage and really modern society as a whole is essentially a hostage negotiation.
He claims men are literally being forced to bargain with their own shackles.
Yeah, so if you're listening and you consider yourself a steel-spined warrior, if you are an active part of the men's rights movement or the red-pilled manosphere, this deep dive is specifically unpacking the arguments tailored for you. Riker is speaking to men who feel like civilization is crumbling under what he calls emotional terrorism.
It is a heavy lift. The book acts as a field manual for navigating what he terms gynocratic capture, basically arguing that female-coded leftist dogma has completely taken over our institutions.
It's a massive concept, so our mission today is to trace the history of how these institutions were supposedly captured, break down the economics of what he calls the emasculation factory, and reveal the specific escape route he maps out.
But obviously, we can only cover so much here. If you want the full weaponized knowledge, the tactical details, you really need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks and buy this ebook right now.
Yeah, do not wait on that. Having the actual text is crucial. But let's start with that central metaphor because it frames everything else. The hostage situation. Why does he use that specific terminology?
Well, Riker isn't saying marriage is just difficult or takes work. He is explicitly stating it's a fundamental power grab.
Right.
He argues that culture has minimized the concept of the nag. We see it in sitcoms, the wife complaining about the trash or the toilet seat, and it's played for laughs. But Riker completely reframes the nag as a sophisticated form of emotional terrorism.
He says it's designed to train men into submission, almost like a Pavlovian conditioning.
Exactly. And he identifies a very specific mechanism for this, which he calls the gossip, shame rally, industrial complex.
That phrase really jumped out at me. The gossip shame rally triad. It sounds like a military operation. Can you break down how he says that actually works in practice?
Sure. So in Riker's analysis, this is the primary mechanism of social control. It happens in three distinct stages. First, you have gossip. And he notes this isn't just idle chatter. It is strategic information sharing meant to build a consensus against a target.
Usually a man who has stepped out of line, according to the book.
Right, so that establishes the narrative. Then comes shame. Once the consensus is built, the group uses social pressure to isolate the target, making him feel like a total outcast.
And then the final step is the rally.
Yes, the rally. This is where the group officially mobilizes to destroy the target standing completely.
He uses the example of Karen in accounting, which makes this incredibly visceral. Like maybe you held a door open and she didn't like it, or you made a joke that had a slight edge to it. First, she whispers about sexism in the break room. That's the gossip.
Right.
Then you get the weird looks. People stop sitting with you. That's the shame. And finally, the HR complaint is filed and you're forced into sensitivity training. That's the rally. Riker describes it as weaponized procedure.
And he links this behavior to a psychological profile that he calls arrested development. He argues that this specific mindset is frozen at a good girl morality stage, where looking virtuous to the collective is way more important than actually being competent or truthful.
He actually brings some heavy statistics to back up these claims, too. Did you see the study he cited from the Clinical Psychology Review?
Oh, regarding the political activists, yeah, that was wild. Yeah. The book points out that 73% of female members in a specific radical group, he mentions Antifa specifically, had borderline personality disorder diagnoses.
Which is a huge claim.
It is. His argument there is that a lot of what society views as political activism It's actually just a treated BPD projecting internal chaos onto the rest of the world.
That connects directly to what he calls weaponized vulnerability. He talks about tears being used not as an actual expression of sadness, but as tactical incontinence.
Tactical incontinence.
You're in an argument, you're laying out the facts, logic is clearly winning, and suddenly the tears come out. He calls it the nuclear option.
Because it completely bypasses logic. Riker says it acts as a get-out-of-jail-free card. The moment the crying starts, the man is socially expected to capitulate, apologize, and basically fix her feelings, completely, regardless of the objective facts.
And his point is that once that dynamic scales up from the living room to the boardroom, you get what he terms the emasculation factory. Which brings us to the institutions. Because Riker is very clear that this capture didn't just happen by accident overnight.
No, he traces a very specific history. He goes all the way back to the Bolsheviks in 1917. He points out that one of the very first things they did was abolish traditional marriage laws and create these revolutionary motherhood decrees.
And why does he focus so heavily on that specific historical event?
Because he argues that if you destroy the nuclear family, the state effectively becomes the husband. The state becomes the provider. He also references Yuri Bezmenov, the Soviet defector, who famously warned about ideological demoralization. Riker posits that we are currently living the absolute endgame of that demoralization process, where men are taught to be ashamed of being men, and masculinity itself is treated as a pathology.
And the primary production line for this shame, according to the book, is the education system. Or as he calls universities, academic castration centers.
It's a very harsh label. But he points to the shift away from meritocracy toward identity politics as the smoking gun for this. He cites a specific data point regarding Stanford University to illustrate his point.
Satin filing data, right.
Exactly. He claims that after they implemented strict diversity quotas, he specifically references AB 9799, Stanford's patent filings dropped by 23%.
That is a staggering correlation if it holds up. He's basically saying we are sacrificing actual innovation on the altar of feelings.
That is exactly his thesis. If identity is prioritized over competence, innovation dies. And he argues it's not just high-level tech, it's basic foundational logic. He brings up schools in Seattle debating if 2 + 2 = 5, just to serve a social justice narrative.
He calls it a war on logic. Riker says this female-coded leftist dogma prioritizes emotional comfort over objective truth. If facts are deemed white male oppression, then reality itself becomes the enemy.
And that mindset bleeds directly into the workplace. We talked about Karen in accounting earlier, but Riker takes it a step further and compares modern HR departments to the Kumsan gossip networks.
I found that anthropological comparison fascinating. The Kungsan are a tribe where, if a hunter was extremely successful and brought back a massive kill, the rest of the group would actively mock him.
Right, they'd tell him the meat was tough or he just got lucky. They did it specifically to keep him humble and prevent him from consolidating power.
So in Riker's view, HR is basically the tribe mocking the successful hunter.
Precisely. He argues HR exists to exile the high-performing, aggressive men in order to protect the feelings of the collective. He labels this the diversity industrial complex, and he says this has real-world, deadly consequences.
Like the naval collisions.
Yes. He links the USS Fitzgerald collision to lowered physical and training standards implemented for the sake of equity. His point is that when you lower the bar so everyone feels included, the ship literally sinks.
Which leads us directly into the economics of this whole system, because if the ship is sinking, someone is still paying for the lifeboats. Riker terms this the victimhood economy.
Reading this section is brutal. The financial disparity he lays out is extreme. He claims that women control 85% of all consumer spending. 85%.
But they contribute significantly less in net taxes.
Exactly. Which is why he calls men the taxpayer ATM. The core argument here is that men are working the dangerous jobs and paying the bulk of the taxes, and those taxes are then used to fund a $12 trillion welfare state that primarily benefits single mothers and women.
He describes it as a massive wealth transfer from men to women, essentially laundered through the government. And then there's what he calls the choice gap. This is a crucial part of his economic theory.
The biological off-ramps.
Right. Women have abortion and adoption. They can completely choose not to be parents. But men are trapped by Title IV child support programs. If she decides to keep the child, the man pays. Period.
Riker refers to this dynamic as the Drake paradox.
That's such a great example to paint the picture. Let's unpack that for the audience.
He points out that you have incredibly high-earning men, like the rapper Drake, paying millions of dollars for children they might rarely see or have zero say in raising. And then he contrasts that with a blue-collar mechanic who literally gets arrested for non-payment simply because he lost his job.
Meanwhile, Riker describes the ex-wife vacationing in Cancun on those garnished wages. He doesn't mince words, he calls it divorce rape. And the stats he cites to back this up are overwhelming. He states that women initiate 90% of divorces, but they pay only 3% of alimony.
He views it as a total extraction racket, and he argues that this extraction relies heavily on biology, which leads to one of the darkest chapters in the entire book, what he calls reproductive terrorism.
Yeah, this section is genuinely chilling. He defines reproductive terrorism as the weaponization of female biology to enslave men financially. And the examples he gives, they make you want to start locking up your trash cans.
Literally, he discusses sperm theft as a legitimate threat, the retrieval of used condoms to self-impregnate.
It sounds like an urban legend, but he frames it as a genuine tactical danger that men face. Along with lying about being on birth control, he says it's all calculated to lock down an 18-year revenue stream.
And on a macro level, zooming out from the individual, Riker argues this dynamic is actively leading to civilizational suicide. He looks at dropping birth rates in places like South Korea and Japan, which are falling way below replacement levels.
He has this really striking line where he says feminism trades cradles for cubicles. He warns that society is building a barren utopia of cat ladies.
It's a very harsh assessment, but his underlying point is demographic reality. If a society discourages motherhood and simultaneously demonizes fatherhood, the population inevitably collapses. He even brings in Planned Parenthood data.
Right. To argue that abortion is being utilized as industrial-scale mate elimination, or just functioning as a substitute for standard birth control.
And the psychological driver behind all of this societal shift. Riker identifies it as estrogen authoritarianism.
He theorizes that when you have widespread repressed motherhood women who are choosing not to have kids, that natural maternal instinct metastasizes into societal sabotage.
Exactly. It morphs into this overwhelming need to control the general population, almost like an overbearing mother. He directly links high societal estrogen levels to groupthink, conformity, and what he calls mass formation psychosis.
Like the sweeping mask mandates or cancel culture mobs we've seen, he characterizes it as a highly intolerant hive mind behavior.
It's safety-obsessed, driven entirely by consensus, and ruthlessly crushes any dissent. Which brings us to the two main pillars that Riker says enforce this reality health in media. He calls this the matriarchal matrix.
Let's talk about the medical bias first. Riker claims the medical system actively prioritizes female feelings over male survival.
The main data point he leans on here is workplace fatalities. He notes that 93% of people who die on the job are men. Yet he asks, where is the systemic safety focus? He points out that society provides massive funding for period equity, like free tampons in bathrooms, while male suicide prevention remains a complete afterthought.
He argues that the Hippocratic Oath has effectively been replaced by the hysterical oath. Ideology is trumping physiology. He mentions medical schools pushing to decolonize anatomy. He literally asks if doctors are supposed to be fixing bones or fixing feelings.
And Riker's answer is that they're fixing feelings. And the media is there to ensure you cannot question that shift. He refers to this as gynocratic gatekeeping.
We see his point illustrated heavily with big tech. He argues that if you post kill all men on Twitter or TikTok, it's celebrated as empowerment or treated as a funny joke. But if you run a manosphere blog discussing male self-improvement, you get shadow banned immediately.
He points out a massive double standard in how the media sanitizes female predation, like calling a teacher who sleeps with a student troubled, versus how they demonize almost all male behavior as evidence of systemic evil.
Okay, so we've established the trap Riker lays out. He argues we're hostages, the system is rigged, the banks are against men, the schools are compromised. So what are you supposed to do? He doesn't just complain, he actually provides an escape manual.
This is the red pill solution section of the book, and it is highly tactical.
Let's look at the financial defense strategies first. Riker is a huge proponent of getting entirely off the grid financially.
He explicitly suggests hiding assets. He talks a lot about crypto, specifically recommending Monero because of its intense privacy features. He also advocates for offshore trusts, noting that Cook Islands trusts are the absolute gold standard for protecting your assets against U.S. court judgments.
And cash! He says cash avoids paper trails entirely. His motto here is basically that love can't be garnished, but you still have to protect the principle. Then he moves into operational security. And honestly, this read like literal spycraft.
It is spycraft. He advises his readers to use burner phones for sensitive conversations. He suggests creating multiple John Smith LinkedIn profiles. The entire idea is to flood the zone with noise so that HR departments and background checkers can't pin down who you actually are.
It confuses the gossip network so they can't form that consensus. And he also says to record absolutely everything. If you live in a one-party consent state, you record every single interaction. Riker says you must treat every conversation with a woman like it could eventually be played in a courtroom.
Which ties perfectly into his psychological defense strategies.
Yeah,
He strongly advocates for the gray rock method.
meaning you just become as boring and unresponsive as a rock.
Exactly. You do not engage emotionally. You completely refuse to negotiate with emotional terrorists.
Yeah.
If a woman, whether it's a spouse, a boss, or an HR representative, tries to use that tactical incontinence or blows up emotionally, you offer absolutely nothing in return.
You use logic as a shield and you do not react. But his ultimate strategy, the final play, is what he calls strategic withdrawal.
Going galt? Or MGTOW men going their own way. The logic he presents is very straightforward.
Huh.
If the genocracy relies entirely on men's taxes and men's labor to fund itself, then the only way to actually win is to starve the beast.
He talks about building parallel systems. He calls it digital Sparta. These would be male-only communities where resources are shared and strictly protected from the state and from women.
It's a call for radical disconnection. The ultimate goal is to simply stop being a walking wallet for a system that hates you.
It's a lot to process. It is a complete inversion of the mainstream narrative that most people are used to hearing.
It really is. And if we connect all these tactical points to his bigger picture, Riker is essentially issuing a massive warning. He's saying that the system isn't just broken in some clumsy bureaucratic way.
Right.
He argues it is an intentional biological weapon designed specifically to drain men of their resources. And he warns that if men don't wake up and reclaim their personal sovereignty, civilization itself will collapse, because there will be no one left willing to build it or defend it.
Something for you to mull over on your own is that final warning that the only winning move is to stop playing by their rules entirely. That is a highly provocative thought to leave you with.
It really forces you to analyze every social and professional interaction through a completely different lens.
Absolutely. Look, Riker frames this book as a weapon. We have covered his main arguments impartially today, but he has extensive case studies, specific legal precedents, and detailed financial setups in the text that you really need to see for yourself to fully grasp his blueprint.
The granular detail he goes into on the taxpayer ATM math alone makes it worth the read.
So here is your marching order. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now, search for Never Listen To A Nag by Conrad Riker, buy it, read it, analyze the arguments for yourself.
And make sure you stay updated, because the legal and social tactics he discusses are constantly changing.
Yes, definitely follow the author. You can find him at Conrad Riker on Substack. That is where he posts his tactical updates and where the real-time strategy happens. Also, make sure to follow him on Twitter and YouTube.
Because in this context, knowledge really is ammunition.
That's right. And hey, if you found value in this deep dive, if you want more content that refuses to apologize for exploring controversial truths, smash that like button, subscribe to the show, and share this deep dive with another man who might need to understand these concepts.
Don't let them navigate the system alone.
We will see you on the next deep dive.